And he left us with a question at the end as, do we trust Jesus enough to start working towards a real Sabbath? So I'm curious, did anybody give that a shot this week? Anybody try taking a day off? One whole person. Awesome. I was really hoping for more than that. So, ouch, that really hurts a little bit. But we'll try it again this week because it does help, I promise. But so today we're talking about silence and solitude, which can be part of your Sabbath time, but it's more than just what we should be doing during our time of Sabbath. It's more than something that should happen just one time a week. It needs to be a rhythm that we create in our lives. Silence and solitude is about quieting our mind and removing distractions and disruptions and noise so that we can create space for God to work in our lives and to help us focus where we need to. And unfortunately, our world works against this concept every day. Our days are filled with noise, constant disruptions, distractions, and we're just consistently taken away from where our focus should be. And silence and solitude is not just about being quiet or getting time away from other people. Like I said, it's about creating time for God to speak into our lives. So let's talk about silence first. Silence actually offers a lot of benefits, believe it or not. I'm talking to my kids this week. They keep telling me that silence is terrible and that it should never be quiet, but it actually does help. We all know that when you're driving and you miss your turn, what's the first thing we all do, right? We all turn our radio down because somehow that's going to help us find what we're looking for, right? Don't leave me hanging. You guys have been there, right? I used to make fun of my mom for that, and then the very first time I drove, I did it, and yeah. So I don't know, maybe teenagers with GPS, they're not going to have that issue as much anymore, but I still do. Even like today, I still do that. It's crazy. But seriously, there's some actual like real benefits to it besides being able to concentrate when you drive. It can actually stimulate brain growth. Yeah, and I definitely could use that. There's actually studies that 2 hours of silence a week can help refresh your mind, and it can promote healthy cell growth in your hippocampus, which I know hippocampus is like a really huge word, but that's basically the area of your brain responsible for memory formation. Silence can help your sleep patterns. Sleep is like way underrated, and I really wish that I would have slept more as a kid so that I wouldn't be as tired as I am now, because I hope that it works that way, right? When you sleep peacefully, both your mind and your body are restored. Have you ever actually gone to bed when your brain's in kind of like a funk and like you've got all this stuff on your mind? Well, the rest of your body can like eliminate the waste and get rid of that while you're just going throughout the day, but the brain doesn't really do that. It actually does it while you're sleeping. It releases a fluid in your brain that actually like helps clear your brain of that fog, which is how you can wake up in the morning feeling refreshed and like, oh, well, let me sleep on it. Well, it actually helps, like scientific. It really actually works. So not only that, but it can help you like stay physically fit, emotionally fit, and cognitively fit. When you practice silence, your sleep quality improves, and insomnia also can be reduced. It's actually estimated that 1 in 3 adults worldwide suffer from symptoms of insomnia. That's like 1 in 3 people in this room probably suffer from some form of insomnia. It can enhance your memory. Sitting in silence for 10 to 15 minutes can help improve your memory. In fact, it can help those who have had neurological injuries and may also aid in dementia and amnesia. Studies on patients with amnesia showed that a 10-minute rest in a quiet, darkened room can boost memory recall from 14% up to 49%. That's huge. It can relieve stress, which nobody here suffers from stress, right? We're all good? We all know that stress can be really negative on us, right? It can cause headaches, heartburn, increase our risk of heart attack, high blood pressure, insomnia, and so on and so on. Stress does so much negative to us. When you take out time to practice silence, your cortisol and adrenaline levels go down, and you can feel relieved and relaxed. In fact, silence has been shown to be more relaxing than meditative music. On top of that, it can improve your heart health. Not only because it reduces all these other things, but The American Heart Association says that taking time out to practice silence and solitude can improve your heart health since it lowers your blood pressure, reduces stress, and lowers the risk for heart disease. And that's just the medical benefits for it. That doesn't even go back to the spiritual benefits of it that we're going to see that Jesus shows us here pretty soon. Next, we're going to talk about removing distractions, the solitude part of it. Removing distractions or disruptions. We live in a world that is filled with distractions. We carry around a device, everybody's got one, that is actually designed to distract us. All those constant notifications that happen all the time throughout the day, those are designed to distract us. The average person actually checks their phone 58 times per day. And that's not when you pick it up to actually do something on it. Like you just pick it up to see if you missed something. Just pick it up and look at it 58 times. That's like once every 16 minutes. So most of you have probably checked it once or twice since you've been here today. Maybe even right now, I don't know. When we check our phones like that, when we've got that fear of missing out, our body actually releases dopamine into our system. And dopamine is that stuff that kind of gives us that feel-good feeling. So our body kind of likes it. And so we keep doing it over and over again until it becomes a habit, and we keep getting distracted by our phone over and over again. Have you ever woke up in the middle of the night and just looked at your phone and put it right back down? I do. So it's like getting a quick hit of dopamine in the middle of the night so I can make it through. So I know I'm talking a lot about phones, but if you look at the statistics for phones and how much of a distraction they are in your life, it would probably really shock you. I know Devin talked about last week that screen time counter that we get. I don't know why it comes on Sunday. I totally agree with him. I wish it came on Saturday night or Monday morning or something, but anyway. So removing the distractions and disruptions in your life, even for a short time, can be really beneficial. The word disruption actually is the same word that they use for a form of execution way back in the day when they would put a person down and they would tie each limb to a different horse and like rip them apart. That was disruption. Yeah, I know. It kind of scared me when I thought about it. So distraction or disruption literally means pulling ourselves in different directions. Is that a feeling that anybody can relate to, being pulled in many different directions all at once? Distractions and disruptions come in all sorts of ways. It can be your phone, your TV, your sports, your work, your chores at home, your friends, your family sometimes, whatever. I can spend all day listing things that distract our lives because we jam-pack our lives full of things that end up distracting us and pulling our attention away from what matters. I remember when our kids were younger, we had our kids doing soccer and fast pitch and band and this, you name it, they did it. And then on top of that, Renee and I both had jobs and we were trying to be leaders in a church, and we were literally being pulled in different directions all the time. And we were so busy with the stuff that we didn't have time for what really mattered. Is that a feeling anyone can relate to? So today we're going to talk about a few ways to remove those disruptions and to quiet our surroundings and to spend time in silence and solitude. It can look different for other people. Sometimes silence and solitude looks like rest. And today especially, we all need more rest, right? We all had to get up an hour earlier. But silence and solitude is not always rest. It's about preparing for something. And that's what we're going to see from Jesus today. So as we walk through these examples of Jesus, I want you to keep in mind that Jesus was preparing for something, not necessarily resting or just because of something. He was preparing for something. So let's move on to Jesus' examples that are coming. He would spend time in silence and solitude to clear his mind and to refocus on the tasks that are at hand or what he was about to do. And he actually spent a lot of time in silence and solitude. Let's check out Luke chapter 5. Luke chapter 5 verse 16 says, "Yet he often withdrew to deserted places and prayed." There's actually 5 great examples that we're going to go through about when Jesus withdrew for silence and solitude. And And I know some of you might be thinking that he just said 5 more examples, so he's going to be here a while. But those of you that know me know that probably won't be the case. I was already given a hard time this morning about only 19 slides. So I'm on, I don't know. Anyway. So first, Jesus withdrew before a major task he was about to undertake. So after Jesus was baptized, he spent 40 days in the wilderness, and he was tempted by Satan while he was there. And then he came out of that, and that's when he actually began his public ministry. Let's look at Luke chapter 4, verses 1 and 2. And Jesus, full of the Holy Spirit, returned from the Jordan and was led by the Spirit into the wilderness for 40 days, being tempted by the devil, and he ate nothing during those days. And when they were ended, he was hungry. And skipping forward to Luke 14, to number 4, Luke 4, 14 through 15. And Jesus returned in the power of the Spirit to Galilee. And a report about him went through all the surrounding country, and he taught in their synagogues, being glorified by all. So Jesus, after he'd been baptized, he knew that he was about to start like the hardest part of his life. The next 3.5 years he was going to be doing his ministry work, what he was actually there to do. So he followed the lead of the Holy Spirit into the wilderness. Jesus knew that he needed to mentally prepare for the task he was about to face, and so he submitted to the Spirit and spent time in silence and solitude to move forward to something. It was in this next season that Jesus would reject the temptation that we all face and fail at all the time. We see a practiced intimacy with the Father and leading by the Holy Spirit in this moment by Jesus. It wasn't actually a time of rest for Jesus, but it was a time that he came out of ready to start his public ministry and perform the task that he was sent here to do. How often, though, do we stumble through our day with no preparation at all? I want you to use your imagination here. You've just had a rough day. Probably don't have to imagine very hard to think about where you're at. Whether it was at work or maybe at home with the kids or whatever it was, something has ruined your day. And you're about to go spend time with some people that were not part of that at all. So maybe you were at work and you're coming home to see your spouse, or your spouse is about to be home, but your day has been terrible. And so you probably don't have to think very hard to get there. Now, you're about to interact with that person, and you've got a choice. Maybe you're driving home, and you've got that on your mind, and you just can't get rid of it. So you've kind of got 2 options there, right? Either you can lumber your way through it and take that rough time that you've had with you into that relationship or into that moment, or you can take a moment of rest or silence and solitude and clear your mind of what's going on so that you can really be present in the moment with your friends or your family or whatever it is that you're imagining right now. More often than not, we walk right into those situations, bringing all that baggage and causing more damage than we do good. I know I've been that guy. I've had a bad day at work, and I just bring it right home with me to the kids and to Renee. I'll come in, and I'll see them all sitting around watching TV, and I'm like, you need to get up and do this and do that, and I end up causing way more damage, and then I have to fix that for the rest of the night or maybe for weeks. But sometimes we can't fix that damage, can we? That's what I mean when I say we stumble through our day with no preparation. So you might not be thinking that really compares to what Jesus was doing, but what's more important in my life than being a good father or being a good husband? And that's not just something that happens by accident. I need to prepare for that, and I need to spend those times in silence and solitude so that I can be present in those moments. I'm getting much better at it than I used to be. I used to be real bad at it, and I would come home and be like a ticking time bomb sometimes when I got there. I could tell you some stories, but I don't want to embarrass myself too much in those. But thankfully now I've got the time and the knowledge that I can actually spend some time in my office before I leave work, because 3 times a week I've only got a 5-minute drive home. So I spend time there praying in silence and solitude so that when I do get home, I can be present with them. And I ask God to bless those relationships and to help me be present in those moments so that I can be the husband and the father that I need to be and the leader that God has charged me to be in my family. And then twice a week I get to drive home from here, so I've got a much longer drive, so I turn the radio down and I just pray and I try to do the same thing while I'm driving so I can spend some time in silence and solitude with no distractions on my own, just me and God. Our next example is actually when the disciples were coming back from some hard work, and they were actually recharging after that. They were getting some rest. In Mark, we see that Jesus sent out his 12 disciples to do the work that he had commanded them to do. When they got back, he encouraged them to spend some time resting and recharging. Mark 6:30 through 32. The apostles returned to Jesus and told him that they had all that they had done and taught. And he said to them, "Come away by yourselves to a desolate place and rest a while. For many are coming and going, and they had no leisure even to eat. And they went away into a boat to a desolate place by themselves." So the disciples had just spent who knows how long doing the work that God commanded them to do. We don't have any details there that tells us how long that was, but we know that they were tired and that they were busy, so busy that some of them hadn't even had time to eat. And Jesus knew that they were tired, so he didn't just say, "All right, you're good, thanks for the report, get right back in there, there's more work to be done." No. He knew that they needed to take a break. So they withdrew and they took some time of rest and silence and solitude with Jesus. I don't think that really takes a lot of explaining for you guys to understand what being tired is, right? We all understand what it is to be tired after a long day of work or even like a season of hard work. We all understand that. They'd been so busy that they hadn't even had time to eat. I know Devin and I do that all the time. We forget to eat, and then our wives yell at us for it. But like I said, it's not a tough concept for us to understand. We all understand. We can't just keep going and going and going and never rest, right? So Jesus recognized this, and we need to recognize that while doing God's work is very important, we must have a period of rest and renewal in order to do that work effectively. What the disciples didn't know is that they weren't actually just resting for this. They were actually preparing for something even more. Because as you read further in this, you'll see that God was working and going to be doing so much more in it. Next, we're going to see kind of an exception to the silence and solitude part of it, and that's working through grief. Working through grief is tough. The example we're going to look at is when Jesus had just learned about John the Baptist's death. This was his cousin, so it was a family and a friend, person that he grew up with. And Jesus withdrew. He went to a solitary place to grieve because, even Jesus grieves. Matthew 14:13 says, "When Jesus heard about it, he withdrew from there by boat to a remote place to be alone. When the crowds heard this, they followed him on foot from the towns." In moments of grief, we need to spend time in silence and solitude, leaning on God, working through that grief with him, and getting our hearts right again. Maybe that's sitting alone, or maybe that's sitting with a friend or a family member without ever even saying a word. I know I've sat with people that are grieving, and I can tell you from experience that usually the best thing that I can say in those situations is nothing at all. Just sitting in silence and solitude together. Oftentimes in moments of grief, we try to busy ourselves and surround ourselves with lots of people so we just don't have to think about it. If we're busy, it's not on our minds. I think that misses a great opportunity to process those emotions the right way. This is kind of a tough one for me because I'm like, I bottle everything up. I don't process emotions the right way. So this portion of the sermon definitely is talking specifically to me. I don't share it. I just bottle it up and I just deal with it and I busy myself. But unfortunately, those things don't stay bottled up forever. They typically come out at the wrong time, the wrong way, and usually at the wrong person. Typically, when we talk about grief, we're always talking about the loss of a loved one or something similar to that, but grief can actually come in all sorts of different events in our lives. Maybe grief for you looks different. It could be the loss of a friendship or a close relationship, whether that's because they moved or for other reasons. It can be a lost job, a change in the season of your life, children growing up, and the list just keeps going and going and going. Doing research on this, I was surprised at how many things in our life can trigger a grief response. So we have to spend time in silence and solitude for those, because it's actually unhealthy for us physically to not grieve properly. Keeping those things bottled up has been known to cause headaches, insomnia, and stomach problems. That's all stuff that we can link back to when I was talking about the benefits of silence and solitude. So spend that time in silence and solitude in a moment of grief, because it can help you process your emotions properly. Like I said before, it's about creating space for God to speak in our life. Next, we're going to see Jesus praying before he made an important decision. Early in his ministry, Jesus spent an entire night praying alone before he chose the 12 disciples. Luke 6:12-13. In these days he went out to the mountain to pray, and all night he continued in prayer to God. And when he came, he called his disciples and chose from the 12, whom he named apostles. Jesus had an important decision to make. He was about to go out and bring on the ministry partners that were going to continue the ministry after he died on the cross. He didn't just wake up in the morning and be like, I think you, and you look good. No, he spent an entire night in silence and solitude. And that's not like a small thing, because have you ever tried to stay up all night praying? I can barely stay up all night, let alone trying to pray. I'd be asleep like that, especially if I was in the down position at all. No, I ain't going to make it. But I look at the story and I think, well, yeah, it was Jesus. That's easy. He's got this. Well, he was still fully human, even though he was still fully God. So that was not a tough thing for him. Or that was not an easy thing for him. That was tough. Staying awake all night, that's how important it was for Jesus to make the right decision on who was going to be the disciples. So he spent all night praying and communing with God in a time of silence and solitude. We've all got big decisions in our life, and often we don't even spend time or any time at all in prayer over those decisions. If Jesus thought it was important to spend time in silence and solitude throughout his entire ministry and in all these decisions, how much more important is it for us to do the same? We need to spend time in silence and solitude with God while making these decisions to ensure that our will is lining up with what God has planned. It's about creating space, clearing our minds of the distractions, the noise, the disruptions, and realigning our hearts and our minds to God's will. It's going to make those decisions a lot easier. And last but not least, we need to spend time in silence and solitude in times of distress. That's not something we're familiar with, right? Distress, because as followers of Christ, our lives are super easy, right? We never have any problems. Everything is just like a cakewalk, right? No, obviously it's not. Bad things still happen to us, right? We still have tough times. People get sick. People pass away. We fight with our family and our friends. People are still people, and sin is still sin. Life doesn't suddenly get perfect just because we're a follower of Christ. So we know what distress is, right? For Jesus, the example that we're going to look at, this is a short time before he got arrested, and the cross was coming very soon. So he went to the Mount of Olives, and he prayed, and he spent time in silence and solitude, because he was about to face the cross. He wasn't looking forward to it. He knew it had to be done, and that it had to be him, but it definitely was not something that he wanted to do. The cross was one of the most cruel and terrible ways to die at that time. So no, he wasn't looking forward to it. He was actually in emotional agony because while he knew it had to be done, it still didn't look like something he was looking forward to. This is an extreme situation that we're probably never going to fully understand. But we can understand when things in our life are not going our way. It seems like the whole world is working against us, and we just can't seem to do anything right. Maybe you've lost your job and you're struggling financially. Maybe there's something going on in your family right now that you can't see a good way out of. Maybe someone in your family's sick, and there's a chance they won't get better. We understand distress, right? There's so many more examples that I can give you for distress, and I don't have time for, but you're with me, right? You understand what distress is. That's where Jesus was in this moment. He was in distress. Luke 22:39 through 44 says, "And he came out and went, as was his custom." Here we see that this is not an unusual occurrence for Jesus to go out to the Mount of Olives to pray. As this was his custom, to the Mount of Olives, and the disciples followed him. And when he came to the place, he said to them, "Pray that you may not enter into temptation." And he withdrew from them about a stone's throw, and knelt down and prayed, saying, "Father, if you are willing, remove this cup from me. Nevertheless, not my will, but yours be done." And there appeared to him an angel from heaven, strengthening him. And being in agony, he prayed more earnestly. And his sweat became like great drops of blood falling down to the ground. Now, as you know, God did not remove that cup from him. He didn't take that away. Jesus still had to die on the cross. But he helped him through it. We see that an angel appeared to minister to him and to strengthen him, to get him through the task that was coming his way. God doesn't always take away our distress and our problems, does he? But he's there to help us through them. It's in those times of distress that we need to turn to God rather than try to handle it on your own. That's another one of the things that the sermon's specifically for me, is because I do try to handle it on my own. I don't turn to God when I should. When things aren't going my way, if I would turn to God in silence and solitude, he'd give me strength and help me through it. It's not going to go away, but it can get easier. But we have to let him. It's not just going to happen. We do have to be careful in those times of distress, though, because sometimes we can get really good at practicing silence and solitude in our times of distress. Sometimes a little bit too good. There's a difference between spending intentional time in silence and solitude versus spending time alone and suffering in silence. We can actually see that Jesus didn't necessarily spend that time alone here. While he did withdraw from the crowds and from most of the disciples, he brought a few of them a little bit further with him. He took a few of the closest ones with him. So while he was alone with a few people. Jesus didn't ask him to speak. He just asked him to be there with him and to pray. In times of distress, I would encourage you to gather your friends around you and to sit in silence and solitude with you. Kind of like Job's friends, even they had so many faults, but we actually see when they came, they sat with him for 7 days in silence because they saw that his suffering was so great. They didn't even say a word. If we don't spend those times in silence and solitude, we aren't allowing God the space to work in our life. Not just in our distress, but also all the parts of our lives that we've talked about, all the examples that I've given you, preparing for a task, recharging after hard work, working through grief, before important decisions, and of course in times of distress. Creating those rhythms in our life and creating those opportunities for God to speak in our lives. We need to spend time in silence and solitude. So this week I want to challenge you to do that. Last week, Devin challenged you to spend a day in Sabbath, and this week we're going to challenge you to spend some time in silence and solitude, which I know can seem scary, but it'll be beneficial. It can be one of the ways that I've talked about, or it can look differently for you. Maybe it's going for a walk, going for a hike, turning the radio down while you're driving, or just sitting quietly. Whatever you do, find time for some silence and solitude. Quiet your mind. Remove the distractions and disruptions, even for just a short time. Detach from your daily responsibilities and the people you interact with so you can focus all of you on God. You can start small. Wake up in the morning. If you drink coffee, sit there and drink your coffee in silence and solitude. And I mean, for those of you guys that don't drink coffee, I don't know what to tell you because that's crazy. I don't know how you get through it. But seriously, like start a daily rhythm and just see what God does with it. Because from there it can move into so much more. And you can work to develop longer periods of time. And then you can even start getting your family involved in those because you can spend time in silence and solitude as a family together. You can go for a hike with your family or go for a walk with your family and just do it quietly and just look at the creation that God has done for us. I enjoy camping. I don't do it as often, but maybe you go camping and you just get unplugged from the rest of the world. Get rid of those distractions. For us, we would probably go get